Hello, Dai here. In this video I'd like to discuss future developments for Vigilantes and to ask you, our backers, a question. When we launched the Kickstarter, we decided against adding features as stretch goals, instead opting for content. The reason for this is, while we were 95% plus certain that we could implement any of the features which we had in mind, we weren't comfortable making promises and trying to raise funding for something which we couldn't be certain that we could deliver. What we decided to do instead was to try and implement as many of these game-enhancing features as possible on our own Steam. So with almost 150% funding, it gave us a little extra scope in terms of what we can do. If you've been keeping up with the more recent updates, you'll notice that, with the exception of content, in particular maps, the majority of the time has been spent on enhancing the combat system. Now, this has included things like region-specific targeting, multiple melee attack modes, shotgun cone of fire, enemy fleeing, additional activated abilities, and wounds. And I feel this has fairly substantially enhanced the combat system in Vigilantes. Now, our question is, would you be willing to wait a few more months to get a better, more expansive game? What we have in mind is we have a relatively small number of features, none of them overly complicated or time-consuming by themselves, which we feel taken together could result in a considerably better game. To take stock of the current situation, we initially suggested May 2017 as a release date. With the addition of the stretch goals, we adjusted that to June. Now, with the additional work that we've done in the combat system, we've probably pushed that into July, and basically if we were to go for the jugular now, July is probably the quickest that we could finish the game. An area that we absolutely need to cover when we're talking about increasing the scope is risks. In this case, we're not talking about enormous increase in scope. We're not talking about, as interesting as it would be, making Vigilantes co-op. And we're certainly not talking about making it an MMO. The chance of not completing Vigilantes as a result of these extra features we're talking about is zero. We're basically going to complete the game. We have obligations to you, our backers, which we take very seriously, and we're also so invested in the game that anything other than releasing, bringing Vigilantes to a final release and as the best game it possibly can be is unthinkable. Now, we feel that the extra couple of months may be worthwhile, given the fact Vigilantes is likely, to the best of my knowledge, the only turn-based tactical game with a crime setting and from the side of the good guys, or the mostly good guys, the Vigilantes. And it would kind of be a shame not to fully realise what I think is a game with considerable potential. So, given perhaps around 27 months of development, it would kind of be it seems to me that it would be a shame not to kind of push it as far as it can go. Moving on to smaller risks, one thing that's absolutely going to happen is it will push out the release time. Now, we're not talking about an enormous amount of time, we're not talking about years. What we're probably looking at is an extra 2 to 3 months. There are risks, obviously. If you start to make a game too complicated, too big, it may become unmanageable. This isn't going to just happen suddenly, though, because Vigilantes is tested pretty regularly. So we feel that there's still headroom for expanding the game. And what we'd like to do is try and move towards pushing in these features as quick as possible. So basically we have time to kind of eliminate the bugs. So if we work now and pushing in these extra features, it's better than trying to put them in a month before the final release, at which time it become very hesitant to do anything substantial with the game. So that's my evaluation of the risks as they stand. There's no risk to completing the project, and it's not going to basically end up a buggy mess as a result of adding in these additional features. I think the most important thing to mention now is that in terms of these ideas, there's absolutely no way that we can do all of them. There just isn't going to be enough time to do all of them. So would really like to get your feedback, firstly on whether you think it's a good idea to spend that extra time in developing the game, and also to pick out which of these ideas do you feel are the most promising or will have the greatest potential to improve the game. Now, there are two key areas that we need to work on. Obviously, to complete the game, we need to work on the campaign, and that's something that we're turning more to now. As I mentioned, a lot of the time we've spent has actually been on making maps. Since we're at about 60% complete, we have enough maps for early access at this point, so we can start to move on to other things. In this case, we're adding things like dialogue encounters now. We're moving towards that. We need to start looking at adding the boss encounters. We need to look at adding the facility encounters. We need to look at adding more items. So those are things we need to do to push the game towards early access, and we're starting to move in that direction now. But returning to the other areas that I think would be beneficial to the game, expanding the diversity of the game seems to be very important. Now, the current game cycle is effectively fight, go back home, run surveillance, level up your character, repair your equipment, purchase equipment, craft equipment, and then go back to fight. So what we'd like to do is to break up that game cycle a little, and also to add some variety to it. Now, one of the things that we think would be good, or would push the game in this direction, is the addition of non-combat encounters. Now, I've been working on this today, and it's mostly in place now. It wasn't an awful lot of work. It took basically about 4 or 5 hours to get it pretty much figured out. So this will mean that not every encounter will be about fighting. There'll be some other encounters where you perhaps you get there too late, perhaps someone basically just needs help in some other way. We'd just like to make the game about a little more than just combat, just to improve the diversity a little on that front. Another feature which is effectively in place already are facilities. Now, I have mentioned this in the last update. It'll basically allow things like better crafting options, buffs, and free items. So it's kind of like its own little progression system, and I think it adds a bit of extra depth to the game. Another key area that we think requires attention would be improving the mission variety itself. So yes, these will be combat missions, but the objectives will be different. One idea we have is to stop enemies fleeing. That's your objective. So for example, you encounter a group of survivalists who are robbing a bank and they're trying to make off with the proceeds. Your objective is to stop the fleeing characters from exiting the map. Now, if they do exit the map, the gang will actually gain more money, which they can use to recruit more members, improve their equipment, build more facilities. So you can undermine the gang's progression by stopping the gang members escaping the map. We're also looking at the possibility of an escort NPC mission type, which would we suspect it would recur on occasionally. One perhaps setup for this would be a group of mafia characters chasing down a journalist who's perhaps come a little too close to something that they want to stay hidden. So you have to, against sort of increasingly heavy mafia resistance, get this character off from one end of the map to the other. Another possibility is base defense missions, where the criminal gangs, or one or more of the criminal gangs, have discovered where your base is located, and they have sent a fairly large assault force to destroy your base. There's also the possibility of a mission with a timed number of turns where you help an NPC or NPCs defend an area or hold off enemy attackers. There's also the possibility of a mission where you could capture an enemy character in order to gain intel, such as the location of a criminal boss or a facility. And finally, there's the possibility of ally rescue missions, whereby one of your allies is downed in combat and you have to try and locate and rescue them. So that's kind of a rundown of some of the ideas we have for improving mission variety. Another big area that I think could benefit the game considerably is the addition of interrogations. Now, the initial plan was to allow you to find gang leaders and facilities purely through surveillance, so just by running surveillance operations. We could potentially enhance the game by forcing you to gather intel to unlock the location, or to unlock the encounter with a gang leader. So for example, you may need to find their name, you may need to find out what their appearance is, or to get a rough idea of their location through perhaps interrogating enemies after battles, or as I mentioned, finding NPC, or capturing specific enemies. It's also possible we could look into adding smaller intel pieces, so information on the number of members of a gang, their strength in a particular tile, the sort of equipment they're fielding, and this may give you out clues as in better ways to kind of, what do you need to do to weaken this gang? Do you need to target the wealthiest tiles to kind of undermine their income so they can't recruit as many members? Do you need to try and target one of their facilities so you can undermine their equipment level so you won't be fighting such well-equipped enemies? The next area that we feel could do with some attention is developing the RPG elements of the game. Now, as a turn-based tactical RPG, we've already worked on the combat system. It obviously makes sense that the RPG elements of the game should be enhanced too. Now, we're not talking about making this a full-scale RPG with sort of 1 million words of dialogue. We can't do that. But we can make it more expansive than it currently is. Now, some of the ideas that we're considering are a relationship with your allies, which affects their abilities in battle and their likelihood to work with you. So, say for example, certain allies disapprove of you killing criminals rather than simply incapacitating them. They'll become increasingly unhappy to work with you, and this may affect their abilities, their stats, perhaps reduce the effectiveness of their unique perk, and perhaps given an extreme circumstance they may no longer work with you. They may be unwilling to work with you if you go too far against their natural inclinations. More ally backstory revealed through dialogue is another area, so you can get to know these characters a little more, find out a little more about who they are and interact with them. Building on this, the possibility of helping an ally to overcome a traumatic life event to make them more powerful. And finally, the possibility of adding ally side quests. Now, it is worth mentioning, as I mentioned, we can't do everything. So it's, if we were to go ahead and try to push the development of the game a little further to try and realize kind of more of the game's potential, we'll have to pick our fights pretty carefully to maximize, the quality of the final game. So basically, if there's any of these things, if you think this is a bad idea, we'd be happy to talk to you. Tell us why you think it's a bad idea to expand the game. As we said, it's not going to be a massive increase in scope, but we think that whatever amount of these new ideas that we implement will enhance the game pretty considerably. If there's one of these ideas that you really like or that you really dislike, please let us know, because we will factor that into decisions on which one of these which ideas we will pursue. So thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to hearing your comments, and I'm more than happy to talk about any of these ideas that I've mentioned. Thank you. Bye-bye.